In my last video, you saw me demo out my old garden, talk about some of the mistakes I made and how I'm going to fix it with my new one. I also talked about the wood that I'm using and how I'm preserving this to make sure that it lasts forever. So if you missed it, go check it out. Otherwise, let's just hop in on how I built this thing. I'm building 4x8 beds, and I'm building 6 of them. And I'm using 2x6s that are going to be stacked on top of each other, so the total bed height is going to be around 12 and a half inches after it's all trimmed out. Now, the benefit of a 4x8 bed is that you can just buy regular size lumber and then just cut it in half and have your end pieces for your bed, which is what I'm doing here. So I just cut all these in bulk. You can use a chop saw. I used a circular saw here, and it's really easy if you're using a speed square like this to get a nice straight cut. Just make sure you don't chop off your finger, that would be very bad. Next, we're just gonna lay this out. If you can do this on a driveway or do this someplace flat, even better. It'll help you get your corners a little bit straighter without having to muscle them around too much. So to join these together, I'm just using 3.5-inch decking screws. Definitely use a high quality screw. It'll give you a lot more bite, and inevitably you'll have pieces like this that don't exactly line up, and a good screw will just suck that corner right in. So make sure it's nice and flush. You'll see later how we trim this out, and you do need the corners to be completely flush together in order for your trim to go together nicely. So get these screwed together, repeat this for every single corner until you have literally a box. And it's worth noting, I was using a regular drill and I opted to go buy one of these impact drivers. It was only about 150 bucks and it came with 2 batteries. It was like some deal at Home Depot, and it really does a lot better job of sneaking these screws in without having to push so hard. So if you were on the fence like me and you can afford it, I would just recommend you just go get one. You'll inevitably end up with a corner like this that just will not line up, and you can just give it a good whack, and that will usually get it in place so that you can screw it in and set it. If that doesn't work, you can pick it up and just kind of use the weight and leverage of the box or of the piece to get it into position so that it's nice and flush. And then once you have it there, you can just set your screw and then it will hold that position. Once you have your boxes made, go ahead and place them where they need to be. My old beds were kind of in the way, so I just moved the dirt that I needed to and then started out with a decently level ground. It'll help a lot in the future when you're trying to level these out and get them in a final position. This is something I highly recommend doing, which is adding some sort of metal mesh on the bottom side of your bed. I have a lot of moles that I contend with, and this will prevent them from burrowing up into my beds, which is super frustrating. If you have some pests that are pretty aggressive, you may want to upgrade to a wire mesh, but for me, this chicken wire is the least expensive option. It comes in 4-foot rolls, so it already fits the bed, and I just roll it out, attach it with galvanized staples, and then cut it to length. Now, since this is going to be the bottom, once there's dirt in there, it's not going to go anywhere, so really I'm just attaching it so that I can get it set. And once that's in the location you want it, grab your second box and just lay it right on top. Now we're going to attach these 2 pieces together with our trim, but if you want to, you could put a piece of wood or strapping on the inside. It's not really necessary because with the 2x6, there's enough beef in that lumber it's not going to bow. So once these are stacked up, get them as square as you can so that they're ready to go for trim. Our trim is going to be regular 2x4s, and we're going to cut them to 11 inches in length, which is the actual height of the 2x6s stacked together for our boxes. Make sure they're completely flush to the top because we're going to have boards sitting on top of them as we finish trimming this out. And then we're using the same 3.5-inch decking screw to go into the end grain of the other boards. I like doing it this way because it is just a stronger connection, and if you were to put it through the other side where my thumb is, it's going to go through the face and poke out the other side, which is kind of dangerous and you can probably scratch yourself, but you can see how it kind of sucked those boards in so they're completely flat. That is exactly what you want, and we're just going to be going around all 4 corners and do the exact same thing. Now pay attention to how these trim pieces are oriented. You can see how I stack them on each other. That's going to be important because as we lay the trim on top, it's going to lay on these and it needs to be supported as much as it can. And so you'll see a close-up here next how that exactly plays out. But just make sure that you orient the trim the same way for each corner and that everything is sucked in nice and tight. Now you can see the exact orientation and how that laid out right there. And we're going to be doing that for all 4 corners. Next up is going to be your top trim, and as you can see here, we're just laying that right on top. That's an 8-foot piece of 2x4, and it fits perfectly with the 8-foot long bed if you lay your trim out the way I just did. So pay attention to that, and then just lay this on. I put 3 screws in, 1 on each side and 1 in the middle, and you can see here how it just lines up perfectly and how it rests on that left trim piece and supports it from the bottom. Always remember, measure twice and cut once. We are getting our end pieces installed here, and once those are cut, they'll just slide right in and should line up perfectly. And then we're sinking 3 more screws, 1 on each side, and you may begin to see that there's some gaps, and if you see one, just put another screw in there and see if you can suck that gap down so that you can get as tight of an installation of your wood as possible. Next up, we are going to be moving these beds around so that everything is lining up, and this part is pretty self-explanatory. A few pushes here, a few nudges there, you'll go back and forth and make sure that everything is lined up if that's important to you. I wanted to make sure everything was looking really, really nice. I think a garden should be really aesthetically pleasing, and there are so many people who have big gardens, but they're just cluttered and there's crap everywhere. I wanted this to be really pretty for our backyard, so I'm making sure, taking the time to make everything level and neat so that when you look down it with your eye line, it's perfectly level, perfectly straight, and really aesthetically pleasing. Now, getting everything level and somewhat square, it actually was really difficult and it took me a long time, but it's worth doing. Just take your time, listen to something, pop on a podcast, and just get everything looking really, really nice. And by the way, this 6-foot level is one of the best tools I own, and I use it all the time. If you don't have one, I highly recommend getting it. The white spots you're seeing there are where I sanded off the stamp, the lettering from the manufacturer. I wanted everything to look good, so I'm hitting it one more time with this wood preserver to make sure everything was thoroughly coated and make sure we get a very uniform application. Let's talk about the soil. I have gone through many variations of soil that I've either bought in bags or had delivered, and this is by far the best. This mix contains a lot of clay, which is a critical component of your soil. Clay is the finest, most broken down minerals that your plant needs. So if you remove clay, you're removing a lot of the micronutrients that your plant and the bacteria and the funguses, all those things are going to break down and deliver into your plant as nutrients. The other benefit that clay offers your soil mix is that it helps it retain water. When there's an appropriate amount of clay mixed in with organic matter, it's like magic. And if you're buying a bagged mix, you're just not going to get that same combination, which is okay, but you just need to find a way to incorporate some of that clay if you can. Now, if you do have to go to a big box store and get bagged soil like this, what I recommend you do is find some topsoil that you can borrow from another part of your yard, or wherever you place the bed, dig up some soil underneath that bed and set that aside and mix it in with this bagged material. You can see here that I have some soil that I dug up from the bottom of my bed and that I'm laying that soil mixture that I purchased right on top of it. I'm gonna get in there with the rake and kind of mix it up. And it's almost like tilling organic matter into your topsoil, except you're doing it in a raised bed. To figure out how much soil you actually need, you can just Google search a cubic foot calculator and put in the dimensions of your bed, and it'll give you the exact amount. An average bag at a big box store is about 1.5 to 2 cubic feet. So my garden beds here were 32 cubic feet, which would be about 16 bags. Now, let's talk about soil amendments. I always recommend using organic fertilizers for raised beds because you are trying to develop soil life. Your soil has bacteria, fungus, little tiny bugs that are all moving around, digesting nutrients and giving them to your plant. Organic fertilizers help build that soil life so that over time you can have really healthy, living and thriving soil, and your plants will thank you for it. I like to start to layer this almost like a cake once I get near the top. So you can see I've got my fertilizer going down. I'm gonna mix that in, and then I'm going to put some azomite on there as well. Azomite is micronutrients. It comes from a clay deposit in Utah, and it is a way of basically putting a volcanic ash into your soil. And you know, I just like doing it. I think it makes a difference, and I always use it as part of my fertilizer routine. And I especially do it when I'm establishing beds. So get in there, get your hands dirty, and mix that in. Make sure that it's all spread out as evenly as you can. And then we're gonna come back in and layer some more soil on top of that and build layers of fertility as we get near the top, because that's where your roots are gonna be, that top 10 inches. So making sure that's really fertilized well in the beginning is gonna make a big difference for the life of your garden bed. And with the beds full, we are hitting it with the last layer of fertilizer. Now, you definitely don't need to use azomite. Like we mentioned, the clay that we have in the soil has a lot of those micronutrients that this azomite is providing, but I would definitely recommend it. If you're using a bagged soil from a big box store, definitely, if you can spring for it on Amazon, buy the azomite. It's in my description, and it's about 50 bucks, and I really think you'll see much better results when you use that as a fertilizer. So just repeat this process for each of your beds and you will be golden. Now in the next video, we're going to talk about irrigation and how I got irrigation to all these beds and the drip lines that I'm using. So make sure to follow along and see the ins and outs on how I built this amazing garden.